it is unfortunately a very necessary skill to know what we do with the work of someone whom we later find out is evil. That's just a fact of life in our world today. But it matters, individually, both what the evil act was and what the thing that person put into the world was, because whether it's art or a work of thought or science, in each case we have a very different subjective position involved, a different connection between the person who made it and the thing itself. With art, we're typically enjoying through the artist. So, like, acting's the clearest example. When's the last time you watched a Kevin Spacey movie? Like, those films are unwatchable today. We just can't enjoy through his figure anymore. But if the evil is not quite as bad as Kevin Spacey's, if we're talking about transphobia with Dave Chappelle or sexual misconduct with Louis C.K., we don't necessarily enjoy through them anymore, but those two figures can stand as modes of their own enjoyment when they continue to do stand-up today. So they're basically by themselves on the stage, enjoying and refusing to properly change or apologize for what they did. But they're inviting people to enjoy through them through that rejection as well. So it's similar to the enjoyment of some sort of incel, neo-Nazi, whatever, enjoying their non-belonging in society that is different from the non-belonging of someone who's suffering injustices. But with a novel, that work could be tied to their evil thoughts, or it could not. It is an individual thing. It's a work of thought. So we could, on an ethical basis, just say, I don't care if it's an enjoyable thing on its own. I'm not going to support that artist's work. But, there we're getting more into the world of thought. With science, it's easiest to forget the person who discovered whatever it was, even if their discovery was, achieved through evil acts, because you still get that discovery at the end of the day. And, what do you do with it? It's this neutral thing a lot of the time. But this isn't my territory. I'm not going to talk much about that. With thought and philosophy, you have two main issues. Is the thought something that has a dark underbelly to itself? These dark implications that if we see things all the way through lead into evil? Or is the thought a particularly neutral stance one way or another that lends itself to evil, that evil can appropriate and use as a tool, like a scientific discovery? So that's the territory of a lot of religion. Every religion can lend itself to massacring people. And it takes careful parsing through to get to that stance that allows you to have a justification through the religion to go kill people. But the best thing we can do there is apply the high standards of that religion to itself. So with Paul, we have a very classic example of someone who wrote sexist texts that are responsible for the huge history of sexism within Christianity. But we also have the actual discovery of universality itself. Like, Paul's the person responsible for this idea of breaking from the Greek polis, our in-group, against the out-group of barbarians or whatever, but finding connections with other people regardless of our lot in life, of where we were born, all of this stuff. So like the community and the Holy Spirit, like that is the essence of what we get with the Enlightenment. So we apply that critique to Paul's own sexism and say, well, that doesn't fit. You hold it to a higher standard than itself. In the history of philosophy, the two most scandalous thinkers are Nietzsche and Heidegger because of their connections to Nazism. But with Nietzsche, it's not fair to say he's a proto-Nazi, because he's very, very distinctly against nationalism, German nationalism in particular. He's against anti-Semitism. He writes about it extensively. But there's still something in his thought, his exploration of Übermensch, that lended itself to Hitchcock's rope or Nazi ideology. So it takes a parsing through, like, what was this thing that was so easily misappropriated and used in this way? With Heidegger, regardless of his actual acts with the Nazi Party, his thought is a shirking back from modernity that is in line with the shirking back of modernity that was Nazi fascism. Nazi fascism is a coming home into the nation and committing these atrocities for your nation to get connected to blood and soil and all this terrible stuff. I don't know if I can say that. But Heidegger's work really gets at something, whether you're in line with it or taking a stance against it. There's a lot of tricky parsing through, like, what are the problematic aspects of his work and what are things that, not that he gets right, but are worth still thinking about and wrestling with actively. But at its very core, there's something inherently traumatic about the act of creating something itself, about, having a work of thought that goes out into the world and is separate from who you are. And you can experience that not just having written a book, but even just trying to write a book and having a book that you're working on. Once it really takes on its own life and isn't just this, like a letter or something, but once it takes on its own life, there's a discordance between you and it, and it's unsettling. So that's part of what leads to like a super egoic frenzy here, like this temptation to just become an iconoclast and start wiping away things and not actually have to confront this unsettling discordance between the evil person and the thing they created. Like they have to be evaluated individually. When we turn back from a work, it's out of duty. There's enjoyment to that, but it's not this thing that you have to just keep feeding and feeding endlessly. That's where things turn super egoic.